Welcome to U.S. Fencing Sports Medicine Podcast. This is Jeremy Summers. I'm the Director of Sports Medicine for USA Fencing, and today we have a special guest with us, Dr. Karen Cogan. She is a senior sports psychologist with the USOPC for the last 10 years. Karen, thank you so much and welcome. Thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I'm glad to share some of what I know with all of you guys.
Excellent. So we wanted to bring you guys some key tips and key insights to help bring up or consider bringing up your mental game and your mental performance. And so that's why we have Karen with us today. Karen and I actually have worked together for quite some time. I think our first World Championships together was in 2015 in Moscow. She's been a crucial part for our national team and their success, and we're happy to have her here today. But to give a little bit more about Karen and her background, Karen, can you just tell us a little bit about your history and your background from an NCAA athlete to now being one of the top sports psychologists for the USOPC?
Yeah, sure. Well, my sport was gymnastics, and I competed in gymnastics for 10 years growing up, and two of those were at UCLA at the collegiate level. And I suffered a real bad knee injury. So, three surgeries later, I realized I had to retire before I was really ready to. So, in that experience, what I learned was there were so many components to my performance that related back to my state of mind and my mental health. So I was examining, using myself, I guess, as a guinea pig, how I could use mental skills to be better in training and in competition. And then when I had the early retirement, that of course caused a lot of emotional reactions. And so I realized, it's not just the mental skills, it's also it's life issues, and athletes face all those things together. So that's where I became interested in sports psychology, and then pursued a graduate degree there, a master's degree in sports sciences, and then a doctoral degree in psychology. So now I'm a licensed psychologist and a certified mental performance consultant. And when I see an athlete, I work with the whole athlete, not just performance and not just the mental health side, but it's the whole athlete altogether.
Wow, that sounds like a pretty big journey you've been across the last few years, last couple decades. Um, when working with your athletes, I know that you actually have been at the USOC for about 10 years, and you work with multiple sports. Can you go through and who you work with currently right now?
Yeah, so I'm assigned to all of the acrobat and combat sports, and I have 11 sports in that group. I don't work with all of them in the same way, some more than others, but for instance, the acrobat sports are diving, gymnastics. We now have surfing and skateboarding that have been added to our group for the now 2021 games. And then I also have the combat sports, which includes fencing, of course, and wrestling, taekwondo, judo, boxing. And so, that's a lot of sports to work with. I have some contractors that also help out with some of them, but I'm responsible for, if not providing the services to all those sports, finding somebody who can.
So working with acrobat and combat sports, you work with, I know that you're working with individual sports, but you also have team sports as well. I know that US Fencing has team events. And can you explain a little bit differences between individual and team type of sports psychology and mental performance?
Yeah, so actually all the sports I have are individual sports, but some of them have a team component, like fencing, for instance. And so, clearly when it's an individual sport, the athlete is focused on their own destiny, their own training. They have a little more control over what they might be doing in terms of their preparation. If it's a combat sport, always there's that element of the opponent, so you have a little less control there. But with an individual sport, it really is focused on the athlete making their own goals and working towards those in some way. And then when you add the team component in, now all of a sudden you're working with other people, and the decisions you make impact the team and others around you. So what's very interesting to me, actually, to work with in these sports is that athletes have to switch from being an individually oriented athlete, and their goals are all about their own work. And then sometimes within a matter of a day or two, in the same competition, they've got to switch over to being a team player and working together as a team, and wanting the best for the team, maybe not necessarily always for themselves. And that's a really difficult shift to make sometimes when you haven't been thinking along those lines. And I certainly saw that in gymnastics. You know, it was all individual for me up until college. And in college, the main emphasis is on the team. And that is the most important thing. And so then I found myself having to make that shift, and it was a bit challenging. So, you know, a lot of these Olympic athletes are facing that as well in their sports.
That's very interesting. Yeah, we've run into some quite interesting things with fencing as well, and we have some fencers that are just outstanding team fencers. Or not that they're not good individual fencers, but they really shine during a team, or really good individual fencers that struggle during teams. So I understand the trials and tribulations of dealing with those types of certain issues. But I wanted to really bring to the meat of the conversation today for U.S. Fencing membership, for our listeners. We're in a unique situation. We're at home. We're not allowed to go out. Athletes have been taken out of training and competition. And I'm sure they're going through a lot of struggles, and or how they view those types of things. Is this an opportunity, or is this a something that's more negative? I just wanted to ask you, could you go over some of the common struggles that you're seeing with the athletes across the United States, and some of the answers or solutions that you guys have been supporting them with?
Sure. And you know, it is changing literally weekly for me in terms of the content of what I'm talking about with athletes. So I'm at the end of my fourth week working from home. And, you know, the first week we didn't even know if the Olympics was going to be postponed. And so the main concerns there were the stress of wondering if athletes were going to have to be prepared to compete in 4 months and they don't even have a place to train. You know, so there was some intensity around that for sure. And then, you know, we got the word that the Olympics would be postponed, yet we didn't know the date, and then we finally got the date. So over that time, what I noticed was that the intensity of the, you know, the stress over the time pressure, that minimized, that went down, because now we knew we had more time. But then the other unknowns and questions were starting to come up. So, well, what does that mean about the qualification process? Well, you know, what does that mean about what I need to be doing in the next year? Should I be taking a break now? Should I be amping up? What should I be doing at this point? And we don't have enough information to figure out when things are going to happen. So when the preparation phases should begin. So it really was more about dealing with the unknowns, I think, and the stress around that. You know, most of us want to know what's going to happen, and when we don't know, that causes a lot of stress. There were a lot of questions also around, how am I going to train in this new environment? How am I going to be creative about that? I'm being told I have to stay home, and you know, I'm in a combat sport. I need another person, and I don't have that. So there were a lot of questions around, how can we be creative in your training? And then also, you know, some athletes, quite frankly, didn't know if they had it in them for another year to keep this up. You know, the goal had been to get through August of this summer. And so that was 3-4 months away. But now to think of adding another year onto that, you know, questions are, do I have it in me mentally, physically, any of that? Can I keep going through this time? And yet these are my dreams. Um, on the flip side of that, others felt that maybe this extra year was going to be helpful to them in some way, and so that they could maybe get through an injury that they were dealing with, or they could train a little bit more to reach their peak, you know. So different athletes perceived it in different ways. And you know, my job was really to talk with an athlete and meet them where they are. So if this is a very stressful time, we'll work on that. If this is almost seen as a break or a reprieve, then we can work on, what do the next goals look like? And are there things maybe that you were going to do starting in August that maybe you could start doing now? You know, if you're going to start taking classes or something, maybe we flip flop that a little bit, start looking at that now, because there is this unintended break that we have. And then, but you're going to keep pushing through another year, which you weren't expecting to do. So it's just a whole range of things that athletes are facing right now.
Yeah, it's challenging times. I know, you know, everybody's plans have changed, and we have to adapt to them. And I think that that's a challenging thing for everybody. You know, the question of, do I have another year in me, or this gives me extra time to prepare and have my dream come true for some of those athletes. So I know that your department has put out some resources going over some of this. I saw a few of them, and we're going to have some of those available for our listeners. Could you go over some of the things some solutions and some guidance that you're giving the athletes and throughout your department?
Yeah, sure. So the first two things that came out, and we saw this coming before it actually happened. Our sports psychology department saw this was potentially going to be a problem, and so we started to think about, okay, what are athletes going to need? So the first two things we put out were, one was coping strategies for how to manage this time if we're needing to stay at home or if events get canceled. So that was the first thing we put out. And it's kind of funny, I was just looking back at that, and some of that needs to be adapted already, because at that point we still thought we were competing in 3 months, and now we're not. So but anyhow, some ideas for coping under these new circumstances for athletes. And then there was one for support people. So that would be coaches, parents, families, how to support an athlete in dealing with the potential of a grieving process. Because, now what we have is athletes grieving the fact that this is not to be. So whatever would have happened this summer is not going to happen. And they may have seen that as their main chance, so there's a grieving process that goes along with the loss of all of these events. So the second one was for support staff. And then the third one we did was strategies or opportunities for staying connected while we were being asked to be physically distanced from each other. And we just now, this week, we put out one on sleep, strategies for maintaining sleep, and then one for maintaining competition readiness. So there's 5 resources now that I can provide to you to make available to athletes and coaches.
That's excellent. That is excellent. I know that the athletes are looking for those types of things. I looked through those resources. I think they're great. I know that you have in your social distancing and staying connected, you have introduced, finding what feels good through yoga or through meditation or through breathing exercises. You have different apps there for mind space, calmness, and those types of things. So I thought that was a really good resource, and I wanted to mention those today. My last question for you, I know that we're short on time. I know that you have many meetings and things. So my last question is just if there's anything that we could give athletes right now of things that they could consider to do in their mental performance in their game surrounding sports psychology and human performance. If you could give us 5 tips of what athletes could do while they're, that they can consider at home right now.
Yeah, and these tips I'm going to give you are a little bit different now because of our current circumstances with the virus than they would be if we were carrying on our lives as normal. So just keep that in mind. But, the first thing I would say is for athletes, be in tune with your emotional reactions to all of this. And that's going to range perhaps, and it might change over time, but whatever you feel is valid for you, whether it is some kind of relief or maybe it is sadness or a sense of loss. So, being in tune to those emotions and really accepting them and honoring them is I think more effective than trying to run away from them or try to pretend like they're not there. So that's my first suggestion. And then my second would be to train mentally while you can't train physically. So we know there's a lot of limitations in terms of the physical training right now. And obviously you want to maintain at some level whatever you can, but this is the time to really amp up the mental side of your training. So those things you mentioned, Jeremy, like mindfulness training and imagery and goal setting, all of those things can be done now. The goals are going to look a little bit different, but this is a good time to try to rework that, because now you have a whole extra year. So now what are your goals going to look like on a month to month or a week to week basis to get to that end goal, which is now a year and 3 months away. Imagery, I've been making a lot of imagery files for athletes so that if they can't train in their practice sessions, we're doing imagery files for practice, not just competition, to kind of keep your mind in the game that way. And then the third thing, and I'm keeping this as a separate thing because I think it's very important, is having some sort of a mindfulness practice. And I realize that's not for everybody, but if that is something that you find useful, I think doing that on a consistent basis, that's really going to help keep you centered, keep you present, and it's going to help you examine some of the emotions and reactions you're having without trying to avoid them or pretend like they're not there. So I think that's my third tip. And then fourth, I would say is try to stick to a schedule as best as you can. I think a lot of our schedules have been thrown way off. There's no one saying to you, okay, we're having practice at 9 a.m. this morning, show up. You know, it's up to you to make sure that you do your training at some point during the day. But what happens is, we start staying up later, waking up later, maybe not getting certain things in that we want to get in. So I'm really encouraging all athletes to stick to a schedule of some sort. It doesn't have to be the exact same schedule, but make sure you have all those components in there: the physical training, strength and conditioning, mental training, whatever else, rehab, whatever else you have in your day. Try to stick to some sort of a schedule and incorporate more of the mental training now because you have some time to do that. And then finally, my fifth is consider taking some sort of a break at this point. We sort of have or not a self-imposed, but an imposed break. And so now we're all in this position of having to back off a little bit. Well, if we're to all keep going for the next year and 3 months at the intensity that we were at a few weeks ago, we're going to all burn out. So maybe this is the time to consider, do I step back from this? Do I take a break physically and mentally, without taking a complete vacation, but, just do I take a break from some of the intensity? Because that is going to amp up again. And once we're all ready to go and we're out back in the world, it's things are going to be one thing after another. So maybe now's the time to take a break. So those are my 5.
I love it. I think that those are all really, really great tips to give. I know that I have a few. We'll go over them really quickly. I know that you said keep athletes, their emotional response in tune to the things that are going on in their lives and what's around them. Train mentally while we have downtime. I know I have a couple of other interviews I'm trying to secure right now with Rob and a couple other people at the USOC, and I want to ask them questions about maintaining. Is this a time should I maintain, or is this a time should I ramp up and try to do things that I haven't had time to do? I think it's actually a perfect time to consider doing mental performance training, mindfulness training, or whatever would really work with that athlete, or consider those things, as well as sports nutrition and other things that we may not have time to do during the actual season and actually training all the time. So I think that these are all actually really good. Number 3 was mindfulness. And you said people can consider that. I know that we have resources for people to see. We could have a whole podcast on what is mindfulness and how to do those things.
Oh yeah, and if you don't mind me inserting, I have made several audio files of mindfulness sessions. There are apps available, and some of our sports psychology team is doing live mindfulness sessions. So, if people are wanting those resources, we have a lot of those available too.
Excellent. We will include those with the posting of this podcast so that people can have those. The last 2 things that you had mentioned were schedules and consider taking a break. So schedules, that's one thing I wanted to ask you about. Is this is the perfect time to do some goal setting, right? And trying to figure out where you are, where you want to go mentally, where you want to go and see your career now that you have a timetable a little bit. Not every competition is set right now, obviously, but at least you have a timetable to the Olympics for those Olympic athletes. So creating a schedule and goal setting is I think, a great time. Am I wrong on that one?
Oh yeah, no, this would be the time to really, because we have a chance to maybe sit back just a little. We're not going. We can actually sit back and reflect on, okay, where am I in my life, in my goals, not just my sport goals, but my life goals, and what do I want to do now? And what can I do now that maybe I wasn't expecting to be able to do? And sometimes that takes a little bit of thought. So, to weave that into your schedule and your time is really considering where do I want to go, and what are the things maybe that I hadn't had a chance to do that I could implement now that would help me in those endeavors.
That's great. I think the last point that you said, that I think that goes along with, creating goals and your schedule and where you see yourself and your vision moving forward, taking a break or maintaining. And I think this is the buzz right now is, do I maintain, do I take a break, or do I, uh, you know, how do I keep going forward? We don't have a schedule available to us. So I think these are the tough questions that I want to ask the strength conditioning team as well. But I think that it's important that athletes, continue to talk with their coaches, and every coach may have a different mindset of saying, we need to maintain here. We don't need to take a big break for certain individuals. Some individuals can take a big break. They have the luxury of doing that, where others, we might need to keep going just a little bit until we get a schedule that comes out.
Right. Yeah. And obviously, you've got to make those decisions in consultation with coaches and trainers and whatever. So, and everybody may be different on that piece.
Uh, all right. So I think I've reached my limit here. I want to thank Karen so much for being with us. Uh, it was really a pleasure having you on. Can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule. I think that we did give a few good things for the athletes, especially the resources that will follow.
Yeah, let me just one more thing I'd like to end with. We've been talking a lot about socially distancing, and I'd like us to think about reframing that language, because I don't think we really want to socially distance. We do want to physically distance. We absolutely have to be doing that right now, but we don't want to socially distance. We want to stay socially connected, and so that can be a huge source of support. So I really encourage everyone to try to maintain that social connectedness, and it's going to look a little different than it has been, but just to keep in touch and check in with people, and keep that piece of this going.
No, I think that's a really good thought. I appreciate you sharing that. Are there any final words that you have for the athletes out there?
No, that was it. That was my final.
Excellent. Well, I think I'm getting cut off on my time limit of recording. So, Karen, thank you so much again for being with us, and I hope that we can do this again.
Yep, sounds good.
All right.
Have a
Thank you
good
so
day,
much.
Jeremy.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.